And when they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. Friends, that is the line that leapt off of the page for me this time as I read the story of the Magi. I've been on many a trip when I realized that that's what I was feeling. Overwhelming joy that we were finally there. Finally able to get out of the car, off the plane, get a snack perhaps, or just be at our destination. I wonder what was behind the joy exactly that Matthew describes. This is such an incredible story that we heard today, that we know by heart. I wonder how many of you, as Jan was reading that, could sort of say it by heart. Probably lots of us at least know a lot of those details. It has sparked such interest in artists and poets throughout history. As you know, some of them gave those visitors names. Others tried to fill in the holes in the story. Many have tried to figure out what that star really was. But the truth is, we don't know much. We don't know much at all. And this is one of those stories that it's kind of surprising when you start to see what's not there that we have filled in the story about. We don't know how old Jesus was when they found him. Of course, we try to mash it together with all of the other Christmas stories to make it all fit. But the truth is that this is kind of an odd little Christmas story. And a great deal of what we think we know about this story, again, we filled in ourselves. They were not kings, of course. They were magi or astrologers. Matthew believes that what they were doing was a truly authentic form of spirituality. And we don't even know where they came from, only that they were from the East. And Matthew paints a picture that their importance was something that Herod noticed. Something that he believed as he got word of this journey happening, and something that threatened him a great deal. And these magi inadvertently become wrapped up in a plot that they never imagined. They become pulled into a resistance, and suddenly that becomes part of their journey and a big part of the story that we have here. Because God was doing something, and they were noticing, not with definitive answers, of course, but with minds and with hearts that were open. And so it always makes me wonder about that night that they were looking to the sky, practicing their science, their religion perhaps. And as they saw something that was different and new and interesting and bigger than themselves, they decide to become travelers. And not just spectators watching things happen from afar, but they decided to put themselves in the story, to become part of the story, and to make a journey, the end of which they have no idea. And what do they find along the way? But a leader who is terrified about losing power. So much so that he is willing to slaughter innocents, to devastate families, to maintain his position. Now, we know this because we know the next part of Matthew's gospel. The way this story ends so beautifully, that the Magi went home by another way, the next part is quite difficult, what this power-hungry leader does to hold on to power. And I always love how leaders like Herod are portrayed. We have to sometimes kind of poke fun, because it's hard to wrap our minds around somebody who is so terrible. I'm always reminded every time of the way Herod is described in Jesus Christ Superstar. Now, it's a different Herod, but as scholars point out, they're all the same. There were several Herods in the Bible, but they are all egotistical and insecure and petty who had cozied up to the Romans and were clueless about God completely. In her 2008 commentary on this passage, the Reverend Dr. Shelley D.B. Copeland says that to some, King Herod was a man at the top of his game. He held a position of significance, but that was not enough for him. He hungered for more. His appetite for power left him vulnerable in his leadership, in relationships, and in life. And so when there is a possible threat to his power, he will do anything. Imagine what those travelers thought when they saw this. This is what they stumble upon in their journey. At first, seeing where the star stopped and being overwhelmed with the joy of what was about to happen, and then going to this ruler in this difficult situation, recognizing this story is not going to end well. They find in this a family that will be fleeing for life. They find violence and fear. But they also find this child who seems other, who seems special, who seems holy in some way. And that hope leads them to civil disobedience. They realize that the world might just be different because of this child, and so they risk so much to get out of town without Herod knowing it. And so this may seem like an odd little Christmas story, but I think it is just exactly the story that we need to hear. Because regardless if we figure out the details of all of these events, the story speaks to something bigger. It speaks to what God's love does in a fearful and broken world. It, frankly, terrifies those who are in power. But it injects joy, overwhelming joy, and hope for those who are oppressed, for those who are poor. Because Jesus comes to set them free, to lift them up, and to get all of those who are not oppressed to wake up. And for those in power to notice and stand beside them as well. This is what our psalmist is calling us to. Old Testament professor Reverend Beth Tanner says that each leader in Judah failed to live up to their job description. Human self-interest and power often cloud our vision, but eventually Jesus is the one who could fulfill the words of hope that the psalmists speak. The intent of the psalm is for all of God's people. We are called to be God's love and hope in flesh and blood in the world. She says it is political because it is our duty to help the weakest among us and to ensure a just society. That is what the psalmist is looking to, is calling us to, is inviting the world to, is leaning on, is finding joy in. But we're not always very good at that because in some ways we are a little bit like Herod. We want to maintain power and control. And when our lives feel out of control, we hold on to that at all costs, often refusing our own responsibility in things. Friends, that is especially when Jesus comes alongside us, when we are called to notice. When the light of God shines, that is the moment. God's love comes to rescue us from ourselves. And that love is unifying. It brings us together. And truly, actually, that can be terrifying as well. We are called to embrace the other, that person with whom we disagree, or even that person who practices a whole different religion or who lives their lives in a way different from us. We are to adjust our lives a bit, adjust our trajectory on our journey to see them, knowing that God is calling us. And viewed in this light, I want to invite us to think about what might just be the main character in this story. I've heard it said that it's not the Magi or the family, but the journey itself. Perhaps we have something we can learn about the journey that God has called us to as followers of Christ. Perhaps we are called to seek out those who are in fear, who are fleeing, those who are threatened and held down, those who have nothing. And maybe, just maybe, we are called to join them on that journey, to keep going, to keep following that star, even when distractions threaten to trip us up or even undo us. To allow the light that those Magi saw to disrupt and to interrupt, to change our ways of doing things, and in so doing, allow a little seemingly inconsequential family to escape for a time, to become refugees until it was time for a greater light to shine, to disrupt and interrupt and change the world. That is the story that we have. And when we look at that journey, when we look at all those who are on it, we see that we have a role in it too. And perhaps that is where our joy comes in. Not because we have reached our destination, but because we are perhaps even in between, recognizing that light and offering peace and justice and love to those in need. That ought to bring us joy. In fact, it ought to overwhelm us in a way that we are willing to remain on the journey together, willing to listen, to love, to offer peace and hope. I can't think of a better way to start this new year together. Friends, that is our good news. May it be so.